A $3,500 check with the memo line, "Thanks for everything," landed in my mailbox the same afternoon. I pulled a yellowed partnership agreement out of a Wurlitzer 1015 jukebox. That piece of paper, tucked behind a stack of doo-wop 45s, would eventually send my stepdaughter to state prison and put me behind the counter of a diner called Shake of Betrayal, where she scrubs chrome in a uniform shirt that reads, "Grilled My Trust," and every cash register receipt prints a 12-digit perjury indictment number at the bottom. This is how a retired critical care nurse with a $96,000 pension and a love of malted milk rebuilt a 1952 Mountain View diner car, only to have the person I trusted most try to swipe it out from under me the week we buried my husband. My name isn't important. I'm 54 years old, and for 32 of those years, I ran the ICU at a Level 1 trauma center in central Indiana. That pension was every double shift, every missed Christmas morning, every time I held a stranger's hand while they slipped away. My husband Tom was a diesel mechanic who could rebuild a Detroit 6-71 engine blindfolded, and who made the mistake of marrying a woman who never forgot how her grandfather owned a chrome-plated roadside diner in the 1960s. When we stumbled across a gutted 1952 Mountain View, number 432 diner car, rotting behind a defunct truck stop off I-70, still wearing its original porcelain enamel panels and curved glass block corners, Tom saw a retirement project. I saw the right thing to do with a pension that no longer needed to fund a future he would not share. His lung cancer diagnosis came 2 weeks after we signed the title transfer for the car and started pulling up the linoleum. He told me to finish it anyway, to build something his grandkids could touch. Our stepdaughter Jenna, his biological daughter from a previous marriage, was all enthusiasm and spreadsheets in those early days. She had just finished her MBA at a private college we paid for and kept talking about vertical integration of dessert assets. I should have listened closer. Tom passed on a Tuesday morning at 4:17 a.m., while I was holding his hand and humming the same Patsy Cline song that always played on the jukebox in his shop. By Wednesday night, Jenna and her husband Derek were in my kitchen with a rotisserie chicken and a stack of documents. Derek wore a vest without a jacket and kept checking his Apple Watch every time a news alert buzzed. Jenna kept patting my hand and saying things like, "We'll take care of everything, Mom," a word she never used before the will was read. They walked me out to the diner that evening, still closed with a funeral leave sign taped inside the door. Jenna started pulling down the vintage coffee posters and packing the menu stands into cardboard boxes. "You don't need to deal with any of this," she said. "We're going to manage the business side so you can rest." Her tone was sweet, the kind of sweet that stickies up the back of your throat. When she got to the Wurlitzer jukebox, a Model 1015 with glowing bubble tubes and a rotating spiral mechanism I had spent 3 weekends rewiring with Tom, she tapped the glass and said, "This old junk is just taking up floor space. Derek, can you call the scrap guy?" I didn't argue. I was the grieving widow, foggy and slow. I let them haul the jukebox out to the dumpster behind the building and went home that night with a heaviness in my chest that felt like a second heart, one made of lead. At 3 a.m, I drove back in my old Subaru, wedged open the dumpster lid, and retrieved the jukebox myself. It took 40 minutes, and a set of moving straps I still had in the trunk from when Tom and I hauled engine blocks. I hoisted that 200-pound machine into the back seat with a fireman's carry. I learned moving crash carts, grunting and sweating and promising Tom's ghost I'd make this right. I drove home at 15 miles per hour with the jukebox seat belted like a passenger, one hand on the wheel and one on the chrome trim so it wouldn't tip. I set the jukebox on my workbench in the basement and took a moment to catch my breath. It still smelled like old varnish and tube amplifier dust, the same smell that filled Tom's workshop the day we restored it. I felt along the back panel for the locking tab, a little spring-loaded catch that secured the amplifier compartment. Tom had shown me how to pick the simple wafer locks on this era of machine, a skill he learned from a locksmith buddy who specialized in antique coin-operated equipment. I went to his old red toolbox, the one with the drawer full of lock picks he kept oiled with a light film of gun oil, a thin tension wrench, a rake pick with a gentle rocking motion, and the lock popped in under 20 seconds. The wafer pins gave way with a series of soft ticks that sounded like someone counting down to something terrible. What I found inside that amplifier cavity changed the next 5 months of my life. Behind the record carousel, wedged into a space barely wide enough for a manila envelope, was a packet sealed with packing tape. I cut it open with a utility knife from the pegboard. Inside was the original partnership agreement I signed with Jenna, the one that gave us 50-50 ownership of the diner and its assets, with a clause that any sale required both signatures notarized in person. The paper still had my coffee ring from the morning we signed it, a little brown halo that felt like an artifact from a different lifetime. Also inside was a single sheet of lined yellow paper in Tom's shaky cursive, dated 3 days before he died. His handwriting had always been a tight, neat engineer's script, but the cancer meds made it waver and drift. "Do not trust Jenna," it read. "She forged the title transfer. The bank already processed the quitclaim deed to a shell company. Save yourself and the diner." I hid this because I thought I had more time. "You have 90 days to file a quiet title action. You remember how to pick a lock, so I know you'll find this. I love you." Underneath his signature, he had written the case number for a probate caveat he filed without telling me, one that put a temporary block on any asset transfers from his estate, a block that Jenna clearly did not know about because she had already tried to move the diner's title into a company called JDB Legacy Holdings LLC. That's what the quitclaim deed was, a document I had never seen, notarized with my signature, forged so neatly that it even had the little tail on the Y I loop, the one I formed from 30 years of signing discharge papers. I sat on the cold basement floor until the sun came up, holding that yellow paper and the title transfer, letting the concrete chill seep into my bones, while the world rearranged itself around a single, hard truth. The girl I helped raise had been planning to steal from me before my husband's body was even cold. The next morning, still in the same clothes I wore to retrieve the jukebox, I heard the mail carrier's jeep pull away. In my box was a business envelope from a restaurant group in Indianapolis, the kind with a thick embossed logo and an address on Meridian Street. Inside was a check for $3,500, the memo line reading, "Thanks for everything," along with a form letter stating that the diner was now under contract for a sale price of $650,000, and that my voluntary severance was enclosed as a gesture of goodwill. A voluntary severance. For a business I paid for with my own pension, the one I used to cash out early because Tom couldn't work anymore, and we needed the liquidity to finish the diner's plumbing and electrical. I stared at that check for a long time while my coffee went cold, and then I heard Jenna's car pull into the driveway, the distinctive whine of her hybrid's electric motor. I slipped the envelope into my bra, which is exactly the kind of thing a 70-year-old patient taught me to do when hospital orderlies got sticky fingers, and I answered the door with the same vacant, weepy face I had worn all week. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that trust is not a gift you give twice, not even to blood, not even when they call you mom with a mouth full of rotisserie chicken. I want to see how far this betrayal travels. Jenna and Derek spent the next 48 hours smothering me with what they called protective management. It started with a living trust restatement they printed off a legal website and wanted me to sign that afternoon, transferring all business decision-making to Jenna. Derek explained it while chewing a pistachio, shell fragments dropping onto my kitchen table. "It's just to simplify things, you know, so you don't have to sign 100 different forms while you're grieving. You just sign this once and we handle everything." The document was 15 pages of dense legalese, but my eyes caught the key clause right away. The trustee shall have full and irrevocable authority to sell, convey, or encumber any asset of the trust without notice or consent of the grantor. I told them I was still too foggy to read legal documents. I said the words brain fog about 6 times and let my hand tremble when I reached for a pen, then pulled it back. I mentioned that the grief counselor recommended I not make any big decisions for at least 6 months. Jenna's smile flickered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression I learned to read in trauma bays when a family member was lying about how the accident happened. She switched tactics seamlessly, her voice dropping into a practiced register of concern. "You shouldn't be alone in this big house. Why don't you come stay in our guest house for a while? Just until you're feeling stronger, we'll take care of everything." I saw the trap for what it was: isolate me, control my access to mail and phone calls, wear me down with faux kidness until I signed something out of exhaustion. I agreed because I needed to see the inside of their operation, needed to understand the full scope of the fraud before I struck. I packed a single suitcase and brought my locked steamer trunk that contained the jukebox envelope, the $3,000 check, and a small leather roll of lock picks I slipped into the false bottom of a toiletry bag. I played the part of the frail widow so well that Derek started talking about me in the third person while I was sitting right there. "We need to get her signature by Friday or the whole thing collapses," he said into his phone on the back patio, not realizing the guest house window was cracked open and I was standing in the bathroom, motionless, listening. The manner of their so-called care was a 5-bedroom stucco McMansion with a kitchen island the size of a helicopter pad and a security system that beeped every time I walked too close to the office door. I spent my days shuffling in slippers, making weak tea, and leaving the television on a channel that played old black and white movies so the constant noise would cover my quiet reconnaissance. Every evening I catalogued a new financial red flag, writing them down in a tiny reporter's notebook I kept tucked inside the waistband of my pants. Derek's cell phone rang at odd hours, and when he answered, I heard phrases like liquidity event and bridge loan secured by the real property. He bought a new Range Rover with dealer plates still on it, the temporary tag taped inside the rear window, and Jenna started wearing a bracelet with enough diamond weight to make my nursing school ring look like a washer from a hardware store. They ordered in every meal from a gourmet delivery service, the kind that leaves the receipt folded on top of the bag. One evening I unfolded that receipt, $187 for 2 servings of sea bass and a bottle of wine. They were spending money like they had already cashed the diner sale check, and I was the only thing standing in their way. The undercover investigation started in earnest when I offered to fix the garbage disposal. Derek had been jabbing a wooden spoon into the drain for 3 days while the thing made a noise like a bag of ball bearings, grinding something metallic against the impeller plate. I said, "Oh, let me take a look." Tom taught me a few things. He looked at me like I'd offered to perform open-heart surgery on the kitchen island, but I was already down on my knees with a flashlight and an Allen wrench. I tripped the breaker to the kitchen circuit first, because I never work on anything with a blade without cutting power. Then I dislodged the jam, which turned out to be a shredded credit card, the magnetic strip still faintly readable. I fished out the plastic fragments, reassembled the disposal, and had it running smooth in 15 minutes. Their helplessness was astonishing. Neither of them could reset a circuit breaker, change a furnace filter, or operate the fuse box in the basement where their filing cabinets were stored. That's the thing about people who inherit or marry into money. They never learn how anything actually works. They hire people like me to keep them alive, and people like Tom to keep their machines running, and then they forget those skills exist until the lights go out. I used that helplessness to my advantage 2 days later, when I staged a mysterious power outage that shut down the entire office wing, including the router and the desktop computer Derek used to print loan documents. I had mapped the breaker panel earlier while pretending to look for a storage closet. The office wing was on a dedicated circuit labeled Office GFCI, and I simply flipped the breaker to OFF while everyone was upstairs. Derek panicked. His voice carried down the hallway. "The whole wing is dead, I can't get online, the closing docs are supposed to be notarized by 3. Jenna said, "Call an electrician." Derek said, "They can't get here until tomorrow." I appeared in the doorway with a flashlight and a screwdriver, looking every bit the obliging old woman. "I can probably jiggle the main breaker," I said. Tom taught me about overload trips. They were so desperate they didn't question it. I went down to the basement with my tool kit, and the filing cabinet beside the electrical panel was locked with a basic pin tumbler padlock, a master lock No. 3, the kind you can buy at any hardware store and the first lock any apprentice learns to rake. I had my tension wrench and hook pick in my pocket. The lock raked open in under 10 seconds, the same type of 5-pin core I used to practice on when Tom and I restored old gumball machines. Inside the top drawer, behind hanging file folders labeled Insurance and Tax Returns, I found a manila folder with a red border, the kind you use for things you don't want anyone to see. Inside was the quitclaim deed Tom mentioned, the one with my forged signature, along with a notary stamp that I later learned belonged to a mobile notary Derek paid $200 to fudge the date. There was also a loan application to a private lender in the Cayman Islands, using the diner and its land lease as collateral for an additional $400,000 line of credit, with all correspondence addressed to my name and social security number. The loan documents had a section for borrower acknowledgement, and my signature was on that too, forged with the same rollerball pen. They were building a debt pyramid in my name, planning to drain the sale proceeds, pocket the offshore credit line, and leave me holding a 6-figure liability while they vanished. I photographed every page with my phone, replaced everything exactly as I found it, and restored the power by simply flipping the main breaker back to on. Derek never noticed the padlock had been picked. He was too busy high-fiving Jenna for solving the crisis. Over the next week, I added more puzzle pieces. I retrieved a stub of shredded paper from their kitchen garbage, a few strips from a cheap crosscut shredder that still had legible text under bright light. I I taped them together on the back of a paper plate and reconstructed an account number for a First Cayman Bank SMB account with a designated beneficiary box that listed only Derek's initials. Offshore account, check. I overheard Jenna on a phone call in the laundry room, her voice tight and rushed. The notary is getting nervous. She wants another 500 or she's going to recant the date. I told her we'd wire it tomorrow. I made a mental note. The notary was a paid accomplice and she was already shaky. That was the crack I would wedge open later. Every day I shuffled in my slippers, nodded vacantly, and poured myself another cup of weak tea while they talked business in front of me like I was a piece of furniture. The hubris was breathtaking. They assumed because I was old, because I was grieving, because I was a woman who'd spent her life in scrubs instead of boardrooms, that I couldn't possibly be keeping a ledger of their every misstep. They forgot that ICU nursing teaches you to track 17 variables at once, to notice when a heart rhythm changes by 2 beats a minute, to read a subtle shift in skin color that signals internal bleeding. A fraudulent title transfer and a Cayman bank account were child's play compared to a patient trying to die on you during shift change. The ally I needed came from a phone call I made on a burner flip phone I bought at a gas station, because I assumed my cell phone was compromised. I called the credit union where Tom and I held our joint account for 30 years, the one where we deposited my pension checks and paid the diner's original renovation loan. I asked to speak with a compliance officer, and a woman named Angela Mays picked up on the second ring. I identified myself with my account number and my mother's maiden name, and I told her I suspected elder financial abuse and needed to understand what Tom had put in place before he died. She pulled up the account and, after verifying my identity with a voice print and a 6-digit code from the jukebox's serial number, Tom had set it up as a 2-factor authentication keyword that only I would know, something I realized only after I found a sticky note in his toolbox that said, "Jukebox serial equals 2FA for Angela." She read me the details of a document he executed 6 weeks before his death. It was a commercial pledge and security agreement that tied the diner's certificate of title to a specific condition. No sale, no lien, no transfer of ownership could be recorded without my physical presence at the county recorder's office, and a verbal confirmation captured on video, a kind of living person clause he designed specifically because he knew Jenna would try to forge my signature. Tom had spent 40 years dealing with title companies as a mechanic, and he understood that paperwork alone can be faked. A live voice on camera, recorded and checked against a file sample, could not. He also filed a UCC-1 financing statement that listed the diner as collateral for a $0 promissory note from me to him, which effectively clouded the title, so that any buyer would need a release from the estate. A release that required my signature and the probate court's approval. Jenna had no idea these layers existed. She was playing checkers while my dead husband had been playing 3-dimensional chess from a hospice bed. Angela connected me with the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit, and within 2 days I was sitting across a conference table from an investigator named Morneau who specialized in elder asset theft. I showed him everything: the original partnership agreement, the forged quitclaim deed, the Cayman account snippet, the loan application, the $3,500 severance check that was the equivalent of spitting in my face. He identified 4 felony predicates immediately: forgery, theft by deception, money laundering, and exploitation of a dependent adult. He also identified the weakest link, the mobile notary, who had already been flagged in the state's notary verification database for irregular stamps and a prior complaint about backdating. She would flip the moment they knocked on her door. Morneau's team picked her up that afternoon, and by evening she had given a full statement in exchange for immunity, confirming Derek paid her to notarize the quitclaim deed without me present, and to backdate the stamp to a date before Tom's death. The only thing they needed to seal the case was to catch Jenna and Derek attempting to force me to sign or speak the release on camera, and the closing for the restaurant group sale was scheduled in 9 days. Morneau asked if I was willing to wear a wire. I told him I'd wear a full cardiac monitor if it meant watching those 2 realize they had been stitching their own noose with every forged loop and initial. He gave me a small transmitter, a digital unit the size of a pack of gum that slipped into a special pocket sewn inside the band of my bra, and he showed me how to activate it with a double tap on the clasp. We ran a test recording, and my voice came through crisp and clear, even through the layers of clothing. I told him I wasn't nervous. I'd been on my feet while surgeons cracked chests open. This was just a different kind of procedure. But before I triggered the final act, I needed to know if any shred of humanity was left in the woman I once helped teach how to drive a stick shift, the girl who sat at my kitchen table and cried over her first college rejection letter. I staged a medical episode, something I could do with the precision of 32 years of clinical simulation training. It was a Monday evening. Jenna and Derek were in the living room, arguing about whether to order sushi or go to a steakhouse, their voices carrying over the sound of a basketball game on the wall-mounted television. I walked into the kitchen, waited until I saw Jenna's peripheral vision register my presence, and then collapsed straight onto the Italian tile floor. I knew how to fall without breaking anything. I went limp, let my knees buckle first, then rolled my weight onto the outside of my thigh so I wouldn't fracture a hip. My body slapped the grout hard enough to bruise for a week, and I immediately went into a convincing tonic-clonic seizure. I convulsed, arched my back, rolled my eyes up so only the whites showed, and let a little spit bubble in the corner of my mouth. I made sure my breathing was irregular and labored, the kind of agonal gasps that scare even seasoned paramedics. I heard Jenna's footsteps approach, and for one fleeting second I thought she was going to check my airway. Instead, she stepped over my convulsing body, careful not to scuff her flats against my shoulder, and grabbed her phone off the counter. She dialed their lawyer and said, and I can still hear the words with absolute clarity, because the seizure had muffled the background noise into a kind of tunnel, "Coach, we have a development. The old lady just dropped. If she's incapacitated, we can get an emergency power of attorney through a hospital affidavit. Move on it tonight." She said it the way you'd say the printer is jammed or the internet is down, a logistical problem to exploit. Derek stood by the refrigerator with his arms crossed, watching me shake on the cold tile, and said, "She's probably faking. She was a nurse." I let the seizure taper off after about 90 seconds, lay still for another minute, and then groaned and blinked like I was coming out of a fog. Derek walked over, nudged my shoulder with the toe of his loafer and said, "You okay down there, champ?" That word, champ, delivered with the casual disdain you'd use for a dog that tripped on the stairs. I never believed in a point of no return until that exact moment, the rubber sole of his shoe pressing into my arm, while my stepdaughter was on the phone trying to profit off my collapse. Some things a cooling blanket and a crash cart cannot fix, and that kind of cold is one of them. I lay there on the tile, my hip throbbing, and I made a silent promise to Tom's ghost. They will both see the inside of a deposition room, and I will be the one who puts them there. The day of the closing arrived with a flat grey sky that made everything look like a faded photograph. I dressed in the same navy blazer I wore to Tom's funeral because I wanted every detail of this reckoning to be anchored to his memory. I also wanted the blazer's thick lining to conceal the transmitter. I double-tapped the clasp in the car while Derek was backing out of the driveway, and somewhere in a van parked 2 blocks from the county recorder's office, Investigator Morneau and 2 deputies heard me clear my throat and whisper, "Testing 1-2." The wire was live. Jenna handed me a suit jacket she said she picked out special, something beige and shapeless that she claimed was more appropriate for signing legal documents. I pretended to button it, then swapped it for my own navy blazer when she wasn't looking, because I knew the transmitter's battery life was calibrated for that specific jacket's pocket pressure. Derek drove us to the county recorder's office, a brick building with a flagpole and a metal detector that I walked through with my head bowed, playing the part of the compliant old woman one last time. The clerk had been warned in advance, a quiet heads-up from Morneau's office, and she gave me a single nod as I passed her desk. I'd later learned she was a former victim of her own son-in-law's financial abuse, and she'd asked specifically to be on duty that day. The buyer's representative sat at a long conference table with a laptop and a cashier's check for $650,000 made out to JDB Legacy Holdings LLC. He was a young man in a slim-cut suit who kept glancing at his phone, clearly eager to close the deal and move on to his next acquisition. Jenna slid a document across the polished wood surface. It was a certificate of title release that required my signature and my verbal confirmation on video that I was voluntarily releasing the property to the buyer. A webcam was set up on a tripod, its little red light blinking. Jenna smiled that same sticky sweet smile and said, "Just sign right there, Mom, and then look into the camera and say I consent to this transfer. It's just a formality." I picked up the pen, a generic rollerball from the office supply cup, held it over the signature line, and set it back down with a click that echoed off the marble floor. The sound was so final, so deliberate, that even the buyer's rep looked up from his phone. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice steady and clear, the same voice I used to call a code blue, "until you explain why you forged my signature on a quitclaim deed. sold a diner I paid for with 32 years of nursing, and mailed me a $3,000 tip like I was a waitress you stiffed on a Sunday brunch. I slid the original partnership agreement across the table. The buyer's rep's eyes went wide, and he started backing his chair away from the table like it was contaminated. Jenna's face went through a series of muscle tics I recognized from the neuro-rotation, pure amygdalic hijack, the lizard brain screaming that the trap had sprung. "That's an old document, it's not valid," she sputtered. "We revised the terms, you just don't remember." I pulled out the forged quitclaim deed with the false notary stamp, the paper still smelling faintly of the filing cabinet where I found it. "This one isn't old, and it isn't signed by me. You practiced my signature for weeks, but you forgot one thing. I've been signing medical charts for decades. I always use a Uniball Signot 207 gel pen, the one with the pigment-based ink that bonds to cellulose and prevents chemical washing. This forgery was done with a rollerball, Jenna, a basic rollerball. The ink sits on top of the paper like a cheap toupee. A forensic document examiner can tell the difference in 30 seconds. I pointed to the loop on the Y in my forged signature. You copied the tail, but you didn't copy the fine tremor I've had since a car accident in 02. My signature has a micro wobble on every downstroke. Yours is too smooth, like you traced it from a scanned image." Derek grabbed for the documents, his face blotchy red, but the buyer's rep pulled his laptop away and said, "I think we need to pause this transaction. This is above my pay grade." That's when the door opened and Investigator Morneau walked in with 2 uniformed deputies, their holsters creaking. Morneau recited the charges in a flat, official tone, the words hanging in the air like evidence tags. 3 counts of forgery, 1 count of theft by deception over $100,000, 1 count of exploitation of a dependent adult, and 1 count of money laundering related to the Cayman account. One of the deputies read Jenna her rights while the other detained Derek, who kept saying, "This is a misunderstanding, this is a civil matter, you can't do this," until the cuffs clicked and he went silent. Jenna looked at me with a kind of bewildered, injured confusion, as if the whole world had conspired to violate her business plan. I stood up, smoothed the front of my navy blazer and looked her in the eye. "You thought I was just the old widow who'd roll over," I said. "But I've watched men die with more dignity than you have in your entire body, and I can spot a lie from the same distance I can spot a flatline. You never had the heart for this business. You just had the paperwork." She opened her mouth to say something, maybe a final poison dart, but Morneau led her out before she could speak. The aftermath took about 8 months to resolve legally, but every day of those 8 months felt like a fresh coat of varnish on a restored piece of chrome. Jenna and Derek were each looking at potential 20 years if all the felony counts stacked. Their lawyer, the one Jenna called Coach, dropped them as clients within a week, once he realized he'd been recorded giving advice about using my supposed incapacity to force a power of attorney. That recording was a gift to the state bar's disciplinary board. Derek took a plea deal to avoid a trial that would expose the full extent of the offshore scheme, which apparently involved several other elderly victims I didn't even know about. He got 2 years in state prison and 5 years of formal probation, and the judge ordered him to liquidate every asset tied to the fraudulent loans, including that brand-new Range Rover with the temporary tags. The Cayman account was seized in cooperation with the bank's compliance department after a mutual legal assistance treaty request, and the recovered funds were distributed to all the victims. I got back the full value of my pension that was improperly encumbered, plus the reimbursement for the credit line they tried to open in my name. Jenna pleaded to a single felony count of forgery with an enhancement for elder exploitation. Her lawyer argued that she was a first-time offender acting under her husband's influence, which might have worked if the recording of her stepping over my seizing body hadn't been played in court. The judge gave her a suspended sentence of 3 years in state prison, conditioned on 200 hours of community service, full financial restitution, and a permanent injunction from holding any business license or serving as a fiduciary in the state of Indiana. Then the judge tacked on a creative condition that I requested in my victim impact statement, because I believe restitution should be visible, tangible, and deeply educational. The diner title reverted to me completely, free and clear, thanks to Tom's Dead Man Switch and the UCC cloud that no court could ignore. The restaurant group retracted their offer after learning the title history was tainted by fraud, but truthfully I wouldn't have sold anyway. A few independent investors reached out, but I declined. This diner was built with my pension and my husband's hands, and it would stay in my name until I decided otherwise. I reopened the diner 3 months later, and I renamed it something the town initially said was too on the nose, but I didn't care. They call it Shake of Betrayal Diner now, and the sign is that same original Mountain View porcelain enamel with the script painted over in hot rod red. Every Friday, just like I promised my grandkids, I pull malted milkshakes with the 1952 Hamilton Beach mixer and serve them in thick glass sundae cups. The jukebox is back in the corner playing Patsy Cline and the Platters, and inside the glass front I mounted a small brass plaque with the case number of Jenna's perjury file. The grandkids come in and feed quarters into the machine, punching the same songs their grandfather loved, and I tell them stories about how he could rebuild a transmission while humming along too crazy. And Jenna, what happened to Jenna, is the part that has people driving from 3 counties over just to take a picture of the uniform. The court ordered her to complete her community service hours here at the diner, under my supervision, in full public view. She reports every Saturday morning at 6 sharp, wearing a short-sleeve button-up shirt I had printed special. Across the back in bold block letters, it reads "Grilled My Trust" with a little graphic of a chrome grill with flames licking up toward the collar. She scrubs the stainless steel cooker, polishes the chrome trim on the counter stools, and degreases the ventilation hoods while customers walk by and order a drink called the perjury float, which is a root beer float with a drizzle of salted caramel that represents, as the menu explains, the sweet taste of justice. Every receipt prints the indictment number at the bottom, along with a line that says, "This parchment is more truthful than some family." She used to complain, but I reminded her that the alternative was 3 years in Rockville Correctional, and suddenly the chrome didn't seem so heavy. I pay her nothing, of course. The community service is unpaid by court order. But she does get a free milkshake at the end of her shift, as required by the Department of Labor's minimum conditions for community service workers. She never orders the one she promised me, the one my grandkids drink now, a strawberry malt with whipped cream and a maraschino cherry on top. She orders vanilla. Plain vanilla, no toppings. I think the flavor of anything else would taste too much like what she threw away. Some people ask me if I ever feel guilty, making her wear that shirt, turning her betrayal into a roadside attraction with a hashtag people use on Instagram. I tell them the same thing I told the judge at the sentencing hearing. When you nurse someone through terminal cancer, you learn the difference between punishment and consequence. Punishment is forged signatures and empty envelopes and a rubber shoe pressed into your arm while you lie on the floor, pretending to seize because you need to know if the person you raised has a soul. Consequence is a diner that still stands, a jukebox that still plays, and a stepdaughter who gets to witness every single day what she tried to steal and what she will never touch again. Tom's warning was right. I saved myself, and I saved the diner. Some things built of chrome and glass block can't be broken by people built of greed and a leased luxury SUV. They can only be polished brighter by the friction. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? I want to read your story in the comments below. And if you believe that some kinds of resilience are meant to be served with whipped cream and a receipt that tells the truth, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. I'll be here every week, telling stories about people who learned the long way what family really costs. The jukebox just clicked over to a new record. I think I'll let it play.